Welcome to On Our Minds. I'm Dr. Russ Witcher,
And I'm Dr. Brenda Wilson.
and we are two journalism professors here at Tennessee Tech. On this podcast, we sit down with other faculty and talk academics, personal interests, and teaching experiences.
All right, on our minds today, we're talking with history professor Troy Smith. So, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm history professor Troy Smith. I work in the history department. I'm a native. I'm from White County. I got my bachelor's degree here at Tennessee Tech and my master's and PhD at the University of Illinois. The line I fill here officially is Native American Studies and Environmental History. My PhD focus was the history of the South and race and ethnicity with Native American and African American intersections. So most of what I do, even though it's kind of like varied, has something to do with identity, really.
Okay. And when he talks about the line he feels, that's academic speak for why he's hired here, what he's teaching here, right?
Exactly,
So-
yes.
Okay, well, what drove you to this field of study or academic area?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was an undergrad here at Tech, and I was, preparing to send applications into grad school, you have to actually have a focus. And I was having a hard time because there's so many different things that I liked. I liked Southern history. I liked the Civil War. I liked the American West. I liked Native American history. I liked African American history. So I found a topic, which is the Cherokees and the other members of the five civilized tribes adopting plantation slavery and then being sent to, on the Trail of Tears, their slaves going with them, and then them fighting in the Civil War. So that covered all the things I like. And actually, I was also kind of torn because I loved the history of Japan. And at the program at Illinois, you had to have a comparative element from a different hemisphere. So I did
Perfect.
graduate level work in the history. So I teach the history of Japan here, which means that I can do all kinds of different things.
That does sound great how those intersect, all those different fields.
Yeah, how did you decide on Illinois for your graduate work?
Well, as you know, when you're picking a graduate program, it's not the location, it's who you want to work with, right? And so I really wanted to work with either Fred Hoxie at Illinois or Theta Purdue at North Carolina. And so I got accepted to both programs. And Illinois offered me full funding and research assistantships. And North Carolina only offered me half funding and sent me a letter on how to apply for food stamps. So that's why, that's really what sent me toward Illinois. But Theta Purdue wound up being very helpful to me anyway.
Okay, all right. And you say that you're interested in the Civil War in the South. How do you feel like Southerners even now relate to the Civil War? I mean, in many ways, I find that it's not over.
That's true, and I feel like, especially around here, a lot of people from here don't have a very full understanding of how the Civil War operated here, by which I mean it was very divided. You cannot just assume that if your family is from around here that they were pro-Confederate, because there were a lot of pro-Union families. It was. I had a friend from high school found out that one of his ancestors was in the Union Army, and he said that can't be possible. They weren't even from the North. And I'm like, huh? So that's something. Another thing is that a lot of people are fascinated by the Civil War. There's a lot of history buffs that could run circles around me talking about battles and campaigns and who was in charge of which wing, but they often don't understand the big picture of what was happening and why it was happening and what the results were.
Right. Yeah. my family's from Macon County, and they fought with the Union too.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, they were. My great grandfather, I think he was based out of Bowling Green.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people forget that northern Tennessee, where I'm from, they really kind of gravitated to Kentucky as opposed to say Nashville.
There were more Union troops raised in Tennessee than any other Confederate state.
Yeah.
I had ancestors on both sides, so I'm glad they didn't shoot each other. That could have caused me problems.
Yeah, that Tennessee, Kentucky line is where a lot of the divisions, I think.
Yes. The Tennessee-Kentucky line, and also the farther east you go in Tennessee, the more pro-Union people were, right? There was a strong Union support in East Tennessee, northern Georgia, western North Carolina, eastern Kentucky, in other words, Appalachia, where you can't grow cotton.
Right.
True.
So they were not as invested
They
in
didn't.
slavery.
So, and Troy and I are both from White County, and there was a famous Civil War era Champ Ferguson
Yes.
stories, and I've read a lot of books about him. My grandparents lived in the area that usually shows up in a lot of the books of where his family lived and kind of where he called home. So
I've written a lot
Cherry
about
Creek
Champ.
area,
I've written
yeah.
a lot about Champ Ferguson. I had an article 20 years ago when I was still an undergrad in Civil War Times. I did a chapter in the book People of the Upper Cumberland about him, and I wrote a novel about him, which has been, this is a low bar, but the best-selling. I still get, every once in a while some royalties. In fact, a few years ago, I got a royalty check. It was like $30-40 for the month, and took the family out to dinner after church on Sunday. And my daughter said, "Wow, if Champ Ferguson hadn't shot that lady in Cherry Creek, we wouldn't be eating Mexican right now."
That's right.
I need to get a copy. Is it on Amazon? That's
It
one I
is.
haven't
It's called
read.
Good Rebel Soil: The Champ Ferguson Story.
I may have read it. Surely I'd remember that. That's a great title.
Thank you. That was his
Yeah.
last words.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, don't bury me here in Nashville. Bury me in White County in good rebel soil.
Can we delve into the folklore around it? There is that conspiracy theory that he did not actually die at the hanging in Nashville.
Yes, there is that conspiracy theory that
Where-
it was
where
all
are you on that?
faked, right? That it was
Yeah.
a false bottom.
False bottom. He rode out
And
west.
then he went out to Oklahoma, and there's a guy, an old guy from Oklahoma who comes around every once in a while and talks to people here, who claims he's the grandson of Champ Ferguson and a Cherokee princess.
After the fact, okay.
Yes,
of the
I
hanging.
think that he and Billy the Kid and Jesse James probably all got together and formed a band,
Sure, yeah.
like a musical band, I can see.
Yeah, some of the support they gave to that theory was that his wife and daughter drove out west, and those days women wouldn't have gone out there by themselves, so he had to have been in the wagon hiding. That's one of the
There's
books.
a lot of
Yeah.
real long reaches for that kind of stuff.
So you don't really buy into that theory much.
I don't buy into that, but I'm not sure if you've read a lot about him. If you read the book Confederate Outlaw by Brian McKnight, which is the best biography, it came out about 10 years ago, he makes a really good argument that the outlaw Josie Wales was sort of a blend of Champ Ferguson and Bloody Bill Anderson from Missouri. Because in the novel,
Composite.
he was from East Tennessee, and he had just moved to Missouri. And it said a lot about his Scots-Irish heritage and his vendettas and all that stuff.
It is fascinating.
It is.
Really cool.
Keep you busy for a long time.
It
You know what
would.
I find ironic is I've gone down a lot of times to where he's buried, and it is one of the quietest, most peaceful places
Shady
I've
and
ever
just-
been. And he's the most violent person in White County history. It's ironic.
So you've been to the gravesite. One of the other theories was that the tombstone is misspelled, and my argument there is back in those days it wasn't easy to fix a misspelling,
Yeah.
so that wasn't a strong enough argument for me to believe that it was
I don't buy it.
purposefully misspelled or whatever.
Why would they have turned him loose?
Exactly.
They had no reason to.
Right.
Actually,
But it's fun to imagine, huh? That
yeah. Well, he had made the mistake of threatening at one point during the war to go to Nashville and cut the governor's throat. And the governor happened to be Andrew Johnson, who was president at the end of the war. So
Yes.
that probably didn't help.
I teach a history of journalism class, and one of the things that I have trouble with a lot of my students is they just don't like history. I assume that you've had that problem with some students too. What do you think the problem is that students just think, oh, this is boring, and how do we overcome that as educators?
I always feel like when someone says that, they may have encountered some bad history teachers earlier in life, in middle school or high school. I had some history teachers that I really loved as people that were not necessarily, like I had one that told me that Pueblo Indians lived in adobe houses. But what you get a lot in those types of classes in like K-12 is lists of things to memorize.
Dates.
And dates.
Yeah.
And I tell my students, and some of my colleagues might not like this, I don't know. I don't care if you get the date right because you can look that up on Google. If you get in the right decade, I want you to get the big picture. So I present them with the story
Yeah.
and point out why it's relevant to now, what the consequences were. And I feel like I have made a lot of converts
Good.
in my classes.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think it's just bad prior experiences in the classroom that have to be overcome. Yeah.
Yes, that's one of the questions I was going to ask you is how do you respond to a student who says, why do I need to know this? I imagine some of what you teach is in the general education, or do you teach in the some
Yeah,
of
I do
your
that.
colleagues as
Yeah.
well? And so we have students take these gen ed classes, general education classes, because we believe that is what a well-rounded college student needs to know. They don't always share that perspective, and so they may ask, why am I being made to take this class?
Yeah.
So do you
in
have a
those
ready
survey
answer?
classes, you don't have history majors usually. It's everybody
Every
else.
major.
And half of them don't want to be there. They have to be there. I have a spiel that I go through on the first day of class in my survey classes. I tell the students that I'm going to make a bold assertion. And that assertion is that one day you'll look back on this class as one of the most important ones that you took in college. And, 10 years from now, if that hasn't happened, don't tell me about it. But the reason for that is that, at some point, I tell them, if it hasn't happened already, you're going to look around yourself, look around the world, look around the country and say, this sucks. I wish there were something I could do. And there is. Maybe not one individual, but as, part of an informed citizenry, there is something you can do because all of American history, it's not big, important men changing everything. It's movements. But the first step is understanding how it works and how it came to be that way. And that's the step that we're taking with this class. And again, I think that that gets most people's attention.
Inspires them to want to know more.
Well, I like to say that I don't just teach history, I preach history.
There you go. Well, you don't have to sell me. I love history. I'm curious about
Yeah.
it.
I don't understand people who don't like
I don't
history
either.
to begin with.
I know. It seems that a lot of times people who don't like history, the older they get, the more they change their mind about
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And the people that we're talking to are like 20. So
Right.
they got a ways to go, I guess, to have that appreciation in many instances.
Their personal experience doesn't include a lot of history yet.
No.
I'm not gonna name any names, but one of my colleagues in a different college from mine made a comment one time about how worthless history was. What does the Civil War matter? And this happened to have been in 2017, right after the whole Charlotte. And I'm like,
Wow.
I'm spending most of my time these last few weeks explaining this stuff to people who don't understand it, and their inaccurate understanding is leading to a lot of things,
Contemporary.
consequences, repercussions today. So he had said, we should be building a bridge to the future. You can't build a bridge to the future unless you set it down on this side first.
That foundation.
Yes.
Did you sway that?
I I don't think I did.
Not sure?
I don't think I did.
That colleague?
Yeah, I didn't sit by him anymore.
Maybe we should just all sit around and talk about history there. That one colleague, that might help.
The thing I like about history is surprises. Like, for example, you mentioned Indians owning slaves. I mean, that's definitely something that's not well known, but yet it's
Right.
still a part of history. And so, to me, it's finding the lost history.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in that sense, being a historian, people think I'm weird because I get all excited going into archives and libraries, but it is exciting because it's like being a detective or a hunter. You know, you're on the trail trying to find something, particularly if you can find connections that no one else has ever made before, but they're there.
Yeah.
You know, that's exciting.
Yeah, I was surprised to learn that too. I'd read actually in the Tennessee Magazine where they have a history column, and it was showing old newspaper ads
Yeah.
about, and it was a Native American who had placed an ad because he was trying to relocate, what's the word I'm looking for? He was trying to find the slave that had run away. So, yeah, and I like that they use old newspaper clippings and things. It gives our field some relevance too,
Yeah.
the 1st draft, as they say, of history, and the importance of that, like the having a part of the record, the historical record.
I've got an 1852 Sparta newspaper in glass in my office.
That's awesome. Yeah,
There's a lot of those ads
yeah.
in it.
It's eye opening for sure. So.
One thing that I've been here for quite a while as a professor. What changes have you seen in higher education over the last couple of decades? I mean, are they mostly good? Are the students that different? Just your overall perception of the atmosphere.
I'm seeing changes on two levels. One with the students and one with just not specifically our administration, but just how universities are run around the country. And I don't think either of those changes are necessarily for the better. I will say that students are great. They're very, I think, they're a lot more hardworking than people give them credit for, which I think is unfair. And I think that they have a lot of positive energy often. But what I have noticed, I started noticing it 10, 12 years ago. Students coming in that did not know some of the basic things about history or English that I would expect anyone who had been to high school to know. And students were coming in more and more often wanting to be given a big long list of all the answers for the final exam, right?
Yeah.
And then let's just stick to that, which that's a reflection of how they've been taught because last 20 years,
Yeah.
right, since the, Bush, Obama forward, No Child Left Behind, this kind of obsession with standardized test scores,
Yeah.
which means that I feel like in K-12, there's only a certain number of things that they're expected to have to know to pass that standardized test, and they just hammer that over and over again. And they don't have time for nuance.
Yeah.
They don't have time to more fully explain things. And so students are coming and a lot of them can get easily frustrated or overwhelmed with the style of teaching that we do that is so different in college. Expecting more, thinking outside the box, creative thinking. So I think that in that regard, the whole country has gone in the wrong direction. People got worried that students in Asia were doing better at math
Yeah.
than our students, and they changed everything around. And I think that they lost a lot of what gave our students an advantage, that innovation, that's been stifled. And so I spent a lot of time teaching things that I would have expected people to already know about, like parts of speech and stuff, and a lot of time catching them up. So there's that change. On the larger level beyond the students, just academia in general, especially over about the last 10 years, it's all become more, it feels corporatized.
Yeah.
It's just a business model. Sometimes when I have issues with things, I'm told, well, that's how all the businesses do it, and I'm not in a business. And there's more and more, I feel, what with the use of so many adjuncts and the diminishing amount of people with tenure and now threats to tenure, more and more power taken away from the teachers, just as happened in K through 12, with kind of like this sort of regime being imposed. This is how you are going to have to do it. And it's a way that is going to please our customers the best. And I feel like we're definitely going full steam in the wrong direction. I really wish that whether you're talking about academia or K-12, I really wish that politicians and businesses would just kind of get out of the way of teachers and let them teach
Yeah.
and do their job.
Yeah.
Trust the process.
Yes. Trust the experts who are trained in how to do what they do.
And having discussions about history with your students so that they start making those connections.
Oh, yes.
That's critical thinking. Yeah.
That's one of the things I like the best when I'm talking, and I frequently will talk about things that they're familiar with, but not in the way they're familiar with it, right? Learning new things. And when I'm talking to them and I see that light bulb go on over somebody's head, their eyes light up and they're like, oh my gosh, I understand. That is very rewarding. That's what I get up for.
And personally speaking, that's when I remember the history. Memorizing dates and events. I won't remember it. I don't remember the titles of the books I've read of Champ Ferguson, except I do remember the story there and the conspiracy theories and the kind of unique approaches to that telling his story.
If you just cram your head full of dates and names without any context, you might pass the test, but then the next day you won't remember it. It'll be gone. I want people to get the big picture.
That is the way then that they'll connect that with their contemporary
Yes,
lives.
exactly.
So
I guess my final question would be, what would be your advice to students who are thinking about a career as an educator? I mean, how would you say to avoid certain pitfalls, perhaps that befell you, and just some encouragement? Because, like you say, my wife's a teacher too in middle school, and the morale is not good.
Right.
What would you say to a potential teacher saying, this is a good career choice?
What I would say is, if you feel like this is something that you were born to do and you have to do it, then you should do it. But you should go in with the recognition of how hard it's going to be, and how, especially in academia, how the deck is stacked against you. There's no guarantee you'll get a job, and you need to be aware of that. But I've had a lot of students that have gone on to grad school, and at this point, even gotten through. And they are the ones that they just have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say don't enter it lightly. Same thing, I also write fiction, and I've done a lot of talking with people about the process of being an author and writing fiction. And I tell them, do it because you have to do it. Do
Yeah.
it for yourself. Don't do it thinking you're going to get rich,
Right.
because like one person in a million will, but there's no guarantee of that. Just the other thing that I tell potential students is like, pick a field, do like I did, take all the things you like and find a Venn diagram point, and that's going to keep you interested. And it's also going to give you breadth as well as depth. That's going to help.
It's true. And we've kind of discussed the idea of ending our podcast with the same question of all guests.
Okay.
We haven't really
Before
arrived.
we end, I feel like I have to plug my upcoming book.
Absolutely.
It's called, actually, they just changed the title. I'm not sure if I can remember the new subtitle. But it's Shaolin Brew, Shao, which is a Wu-Tang Clan song. Shaolin Brew, Race, Identity, and the Development of the Superhero.
Okay. That ought to interest our students out there.
I would think
right?
so. Mississippi University Press.
And we could get probably the link to that
When
and
it comes
information
out,
up on our website. So
It may be a few months.
fantastic. Yes, thanks for sharing that. Again, we haven't really arrived at what our standard question will be, but we were discussing it before the show that we kind of like to hear from faculty who might want to share anything surprising or odd that you've ever experienced, or even the most fulfilling part of your job. So kind of wherever you want to go with
I
that.
thought you were going to ask me my favorite swear word.
we considered
I
that.
think the two of you may watch or listen to the
Yes.
same podcast.
Yes,
Yes. We try to branch out. We don't want to steal their idea, but something wacky. I'd titled it
The
Wackademia.
The
if you
wackiest things I probably can't repeat.
could. Okay, and that's what we thought.
Entertaining, I guess it's entertaining to other people. And sometimes, I make a stink about people having their cell phones on. Sometimes I forget to turn mine off. And my
So
ringtone
that's embarrassing.
is the Roger Miller song from the Disney Robin Hood cartoon. Robin Hood, Little John walking through the forest, lolly, golly, what a day. So I'll be up there lecturing, and all of a sudden, that's coming out of my pocket.
Yeah.
that's embarrassing.
I thought you were going to say when you get someone from history, the names interposed or something. I sometimes say things and I look at their faces in the room and I realize I don't know what I've just said, but it didn't make sense.
That happens to me
all the time. Yeah.
The most fulfilling thing for me is when students come back, either at the end when they're about to graduate or after they've graduated, and tell me that I made a difference.
Yeah.
And that I have changed their life in some way. You get these little challenge coins.
Yes.
Those mean more to me than any of the awards on my wall, because it's coming from students.
That's true. Yeah, I can see that. Did you have any?
I just appreciate you coming
Yes.
and speaking with us and starting off this series. So it's a historic moment here.
You have made your mark.
Pun intended. Well, I'm always happy to have the opportunity to bloviate at length. I usually just do it without an invitation. Thank you.
We're using this as an excuse to have good conversations with our interesting colleagues. So
Right.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have the chance to talk. So thank you.